Read between the line items. This week, we're joined by Ward Nakota Isga Councillor Reid Clarke for a conversation about the upcoming 4-year budget.
We talked about the struggle to keep businesses in Edmonton, the need for better bylaw enforcement, and how infill has impacted the tax situation.
Hi, I'm Mac.
I'm Stephanie.
And we're Speaking Municipally. Welcome back to Speaking Municipally, episode 365. We've got another special episode for you today. This is the second in our two-part series on the state of Edmonton's finances as we head into Council's summer break and the next 4-year budget. So last episode, if you missed that, we spoke with Councillor Aaron Paquette from Ward Nakota. It's a great conversation from one of the longest serving members on council and sort of the experience that he's had going through budgets in the past. So we encourage you to check that out if you haven't. In this episode, we're going to hear from Councillor Reid Clarke, who was just elected to his first term in Ward Nakota Isga last fall. So Stephanie, you got to do this interview with Councillor Clarke. How did that go?
You know, it was really interesting. I think one of my favorite parts about it, and maybe this is just me being a huge nerd for politics, but I really loved hearing his insights just like from a human level about what it's been like taking on this job and what's surprised him. He says something about how every single day something new comes along and surprises him. And I think we see a lot in municipal politics, especially around the election cycle. And I'm not necessarily saying that Reid Clarke did this sort of thing, but you hear a lot about, you know, the candidates come in and they go, why isn't the city doing this? It just doesn't make any sense at all. And then I imagine that once they actually get elected, they go, oh, okay, this is why. And I wanted to ask a little bit about that, so we get into that. So just from, I don't know, from a human level, it was really interesting to see sort of how a quote unquote normal person who is brand new to this is approaching the job, as opposed to Aaron Paquette, who has a bunch of these under his belt.
Okay, so let's get into this conversation. Here's Stephanie's interview with Councillor Reid Clarke.
Councillor Clarke, thank you so much for joining me to chat a little bit about budget. It's been a long journey, you know, getting to this point so far. It kind of feels like it's taking like the whole year leading up to the budget deliberations. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's a process. You know, when I first got elected and I met with Mayor Knack over coffee, and he kind of explained, he's like, hey, here's how we're going to build the budget and do it differently than we've done it before, Reid. He's like, we're going to have this thing, it's called the strategic planning session. I was like, whoa, I was like, we haven't done this before? Like, that's crazy, because every organization I've led or board have been a part of, we have the strategic planning session, and you go away for a night or find a location and put the sticky notes up and do that whole thing. So that, when I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, obviously we should be doing that. That's great. And to kind of go through that process, land on our council 4 priorities, and then start it way earlier, like start getting the budget presentations in really Q1 this year is when we did it. And then kudos to the mayor and his team for doing the budget engagement sessions in every ward. I thought that was a really important step, and the survey that put out with that to really get people engaged on how this process works. So then now we're in a spot where, we're at the end of June, and we've already had a lot of conversations about this, and we're having a few more before we go on recess on July 9th that are pretty important. So we'll be in a way better spot when we come back in August and really start building this thing out for the fall.
So as council heads into the 27 to 2030 budget, how would you describe Edmonton's financial position?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a secret to anybody that we're in a tough spot, right? We've got a lot of infrastructure deficit that we have to kind of come up with, right? And, tax rates are been pretty high the last few years after some years being, pretty low. And then, citizens of Edmonton still want their services, right? They still want things to be done well and done better. So it is a tough spot. I don't think we're unique in that. I think a lot of municipalities are in that, and as funding is less than what it used to be traditionally from the province and the federal government. We don't have a lot of levers. Like, when I came into this, I'm like, yeah, I guess we have, there's probably an expense issue we got to look at, but there's also a revenue issue we got to look at. And as I go through this, I'm like, there's just not that many places to generate more revenue, right? I mean, there's property taxes, obviously, there's user fees, there's fines, there's development permits, all that kind of, but there's not that many kind of things you can pull really on that revenue side. And that's a little bit different than me kind of coming into this as a new counselor and looking at it more from a business perspective. I always hate the example of like try to cut your way to prosperity. I never like that. It's always like, well, let's generate more revenue and try to figure out that way. But in the municipal government sense, it's tough because there just isn't that many places to really get enough revenue to be able to make up all the expenses and services we have to provide.
Yeah. That kind of touches on a couple of things that I did want to ask you about.
Yeah.
Um, what were some of those ideas that you maybe had for generating revenue when you were coming in as a new counselor? And then, what happened with that wake up call saying, oh, actually, maybe this isn't going to work out?
Well, one of the kind of big ideas I had coming in, I was like, okay, well, hold on. How can we get like more partnerships and corporate involved to try to help offset some of the expenses we had? So I thought that could be like a really big revenue stream for us. And kind of going through that, and I put a motion that was defeated on that. But I don't know, even if we got there and we put ads on everything and we got corporate good Edmonton-based companies to support these things, Stephanie, I don't know if it would be enough money. Like, it would be kind of a drop in the pan with it, which
Mhm.
I thought it'd be bigger, right, than what that would be. So I thought that would be something. I also thought, the city has, for one of the assets, like we have a lot of land, we have a lot of buildings, right? I was like, okay, well, how do we put these like essentially on sale? How do we put these on sale and get rid of some of these assets and sell them to generate more revenue? And that's a tricky one as well, because a lot of the land, as I went kind of through the process with admin, is like a lot of it is not shovel ready. It's not serviced at the level we need. So it's not easy to just hand over to a developer and say, hey, buy this land and go at it. And then we'll get some future tax revenue. And then also our buildings and our assets. And, we're starting to look at some of that asset rationalization, but there's over 1,000 buildings. But the state that some are in are not very good as well. They'll need a lot of tenant improvements from whoever would buy them. And then we also kind of want to maintain some of them for like, the not-for-profit sector as well. So I thought those things were like, oh, coming into this, I'm like, oh, these are obvious. Let's make these moves and this can generate revenue. And it's a little bit trickier than I thought on it. And it might not still yield the returns we need.
Yeah. So it's just complex. Like whenever, I've been reporting on city municipal stuff for like 4 or 5 years now, and I'm just always amazed at how actually complex it all always is. Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many layers to this. There's so many departments. It's a really kind of unique structure. Like,
Hmm.
I look at us as city councils, kind of a board of directors. We have a city manager who's kind of a CEO, and then there's 70 plus departments and department leads there, and then and layers below that. But it doesn't operate exactly like that because everyone's kind of got to do their part. And within all those departments, there's so many different things too. I mean, you look at community services and the range and scope that's under that one kind of branch is immense. It touches so many different things, right? So
Right.
it's yeah, I'm probably surprised every day about the complexity that goes that goes into all this. And it's it is easy to say for some people on the outside to be like, hey, you got to run it like a business, but it ain't. But it's not a business. It's different than that. It's a government, right? So
Mhm.
there might be some things, with my experience in that sector that I can bring forward, but there's still so many unique cases that really add a whole different layer of complexity.
We've touched on this a little bit, but let's
Mhm.
go a little deeper on it. Like, what is your understanding about how we got to this position, and what are some other things that people might not realize about how we got to this position?
Well, I mean, from a kind of a high level general sense, I mean, how we got to this position is, I think for a lot of years it was not having, dedicated maintenance in our facilities and our infrastructure, right? So we were not putting the dollars we need to do and getting that really from the tax base to keep up with that. And then, as the mayor said numerous times, I mean, when you add 250,000 people in a short amount of time, that pressure is real and that growth is real. And we should be encouraged by that people are selecting Edmonton to come, whether it's from another country or interprovincial. And we're still seeing that now with everything going on, which is I think really good to see and really encouraging and where we're at from our own economics. But you add those things up where we probably didn't do as great of a job as we could have in terms of making sure our infrastructure renewed, and then just the sheer amount of people that are coming to Edmonton and the growth pressures that come with that. Those two things is how we got here. So it's hard to say, like, I don't blame any counselors in the past for the decisions they made. I think everyone had all the information they had and had to make the choices in front of them. But it's, you know, even when I got into this now, like there's so many decisions that were made years ago that I've got to deal with, and you get put in a spot as a counselor. I'm like, well, I got option A and B in front of me, and I don't really love either one, but which one
Yeah.
sucks the least, right? And you kind of have to make those choices. So, we have to look at that too. Is this isn't just in my 4-year term on this, because the choices we're making are going to affect 8 years, 10 years down the road. And I don't know if kind of the public understands that side of things, that it's nice to do everything in a 4-year budget, and try to keep it as contained in there as much as possible. But stuff's going to have effects for years and years, long after I'm gone.
Yeah, so I totally see that. Every year when the tax increase number gets released, the
Mhm.
percentage, whether it's, back during COVID when it was 0% or 1% or whatever it
Yeah.
was, and then these days when it's a little bit closer to 5, 6, 7%, that is like the headline, and everyone's very
Yeah.
focused on what their taxes are going to increase the next year. But then, that 0% tax increase during COVID had a big effect on things for the next few years, and everyone loved it at the time, but maybe not so much now. And I know that some other counselors have said, like, "I regret doing that. I regret doing that tiny tax increase because it kind of put us on a bad path." Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I was at an event, yesterday, it was the West End Business Association, the mayor was speaking, and he brought up that point kind of exactly. Said, looking back at it, I think I would have at least liked to keep up the taxes with inflation,
Mhm.
but it was hard to do that at the time. I mean, the sky was falling. Nobody knew what was happening.
Totally.
And I think kind of this last council, like as much as they wanted to get things done in a 4-year budget, when the world's changing so fast, they kind of had to go on the spring and the fall supplementary budget and make adjustments, because things were changing all the time, whether businesses could be open, whether they couldn't, whether we had mask mandates, back to work, not back, it was all those sort of things. So I don't fault them at the time to have to make the decisions with what was in front of them. I think that would have been really tough, right? And it's, looking at it hindsight, like, oh, we should have made this decision here and this would have helped us, and we wouldn't have had maybe this infrastructure gap now. But until you're in that seat in that moment, it's really tough to put yourself in those shoes.
Yeah, totally. Speaking of renewal and
Mhm.
maintenance, there's some talk about a dedicated renewal levy or reserve. Do you support that sort of thing, and why or why not?
Yeah, that came up at infrastructure committee, and we all supported it. I think everybody. I think it was 5-0 at committee. It makes sense to have a fund that's dedicated to that. I mean, we set that up years ago in terms of neighborhood renewal as well. I think that was probably under Mandela at the time, and it just made sense. It was like, hey, these things, like we know the scope of them, we know the life cycle they have. So to put money aside for doing these roads, for sidewalks, for active transportation, for alleys, for all those things, I think just makes sense. And the more you get ahead of it, and then you can put those funds there, which are really core services and needs that Edmontonians have, right? It affects kind of everyone. I think that should have been, maybe we should have looked at that a while ago. Maybe it was done in a different way. I don't know. But to do that now makes a ton of sense. And I think that's an understandable thing, that if that comes on a tax levy, people get it. It's like, okay, we're putting money in for renewal so that we have a pocket to pull out of when these things inevitably, with the world, the climate that we're in, are going to start to need a total paving, restructuring, redesign, all those kind of things. So I think it made total sense. And even at committee, I think we all just passed it and selected, because everyone kind of read the report and knew what the details were and said, okay, this lines up.
I mean, it's if you're going to be taking the tax money from a specific levy versus just the general tax levy, and it's going to renewal anyways, kind of seems like a no-brainer, I guess.
We'll have more with Councillor Clarke in just a moment. This episode is brought to you by the Edmonton City as Museum project. Join eCamp for 2 immersive walking experiences this summer. The Curiosity Tours bring Edmonton's past to life, exploring the stories that shaped our city. One will take you downtown for the working class history of our city, while the other will take you to the Rossdale neighborhood to see how it changed through the lives of 2 kids who grew up there. Tours are available into September on Thursdays or Saturdays. Learn more at citymuseumedmonton.ca/tours. That's citymuseumedmonton.ca/tours. Now back to our interview with Councillor Clarke.
So speaking of like taxes going up,
Yeah,
again, you hear a lot from residents. My taxes keep going up, but
yeah.
services feel worse. What do you say to your constituents when you hear that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I hear that a lot. People email, calls, messages on social media, popping by my office all the time. It's taxes, and I hear that from the residential side. I also hear it a lot from the business side. And in my ward, like the West Industrial is a big pocket, so I hear that, and I totally get the concerns, like how much the increase has been going up, and how much that affects people, especially if you're on a fixed income and you're getting hit with not only a higher assessment but increased tax rate, right? And then I hear from businesses where it's like, hey, now property taxes are becoming my number three or number two expense on my line item, and this is a real thing. And if I look across the street to Atchison or in the south in
Mm,
Tinisku, my taxes are a third of that. And I'm a company that's been here for years, and maybe it's been passed on generation, whatever. All my employees are here. I'm a big supporter of Edmonton, proud Edmontonian. I want to stay here, but like these numbers are starting to not make sense for me. What can we do about that, right? And that's the big question on it. So I mean, the answer is complex, but I think what we got presented in terms of numbers for the tax rate, they're a little bit higher than 5, 4, 3, 3 in the next 4-year budget. If we could get to those numbers, and what had been presented, we weren't that far off, Stephanie. It was like 5.6, 4.3, 3.9, 3.7. But if we get to like 5, 4, 3, 3, and that's 15% over 4 years on average, 3.75. I think that would be a really good signal that's saying, hey, we understand that these are becoming real pressures to everybody, whether it's residential or it's on the business side. And we're going to take some, dedicated measures to really bring that down. And it might not get down right away, but we're going to be able to get that down in this 4-year budget. So
mm.
that's where my lens is. And then the question always comes up. It's like, well, I still want snow removed. I still want the roads paved. I still want more transit. I still want a bus out here. So it's kind of having that honest conversation on service levels. And I think that has come up already a few times at council, and it will even later as we get through his budget. But we have to be pretty honest with Edmontonians and look at, like, if you just say we're going to drop service levels across the board, people are like, well, I don't want that. I want these services to be better. What are you talking about? Like, I got potholes. We didn't even do my road this winter, Reed. Like, what are you talking about? And I don't think it's that. I think we have to look at some of the policies in these service levels and make some choices. So, one thing that came up at infrastructure committee was about sports and rec indoor facilities, right? And right now the policy is that you're 5 kilometers from your residence to those locations. But if we want to maintain some of these pools specifically and some other facilities, that might get into a pretty big number. Like it's 500 million or it's a billion plus if we really want to do it well. So we might have to have an honest conversation with Edmontonians and be like, well, what if you were now 7.5 kilometers away or 10 kilometers away from those facilities? Is that a better option than us adding a whole bunch more money to our capital and our operating, debt and budget, and the effects that would have on your taxes, right? So though I think those are the kind of things that we really need to talk about. And I know there's more engagement going on this summer, and there'll be a lot more in the fall. But that's kind of the crux of this. It's like where are those service levels that you know, Edmontonians would be okay with saying, okay, if that changed a little bit, I'm okay with that. Right. And I could see that being a compromise if that gets taxes down, because I mean taxes have a real effect on affordability and opportunity, right? Taxes go to homeowners, they're gonna get to renters, maybe not right away, but if they
Yeah.
keep going up, we'll see those rents go up. It's the only way to do it. And if businesses are kind of hindered by the tax rate, it's tough for them to expand, to have more jobs, more economic development. And the last thing we want to see is somebody moving across the street to Atchison and taking their 150 employees with them, right?
Yeah, totally. I think I'm so fascinated by the whole industrial thing, to pick up on that thread, because this region is really known for its industrial strengths, yet Edmonton is not capturing as much as it used to, and we have such limited space left. And I've also heard, just kind of anecdotally, that like the actual land itself is kind of difficult to develop versus like just like the soil makeup in West Edmonton is different than Nisku, for example.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on like expanding industrial to increase revenue in that way?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, so one, we gotta look at taxes. That's what I hear clear. So we gotta figure out a way to kind of get that down. I think to more of a predictable level that businesses understand. So when they're planning out 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, they kind of know where the trend is going. I really like the idea. So the economic development plan that got released, I worked a lot with admin on making sure some things were kind of in there. And if you got into the report enough and saw it, there's some plans in there. And what I really like to see is almost like a business expansion credit. So
Mm.
let's say you're an Edmonton operator, you're in West Edmonton, you got a facility, and you want to buy the piece of land kind of next to you, and it's available, and it all the soil things you talked about are fine. If you want to take on that piece of land, what kind of incentives and credits can we give to you for you to expand so that you don't move out to those neighboring
Yeah.
municipalities? So does that look like, some kind of tax credit on that new development for how many years? That's an opportunity. A lot of people are saying, okay, that's something I could work with, right? And then the other level of that is kind of goes down to permitting and licensing, and that gets more complex in industrial than it would be for just like hospitality, let's say. But how do we get that process where we've done a really good job on residential, where it's like it's super quick to get that going? How do we get that for industrial and commercial on the same kind of path, right? That's a lever that's really in our control of municipalities. So does that about it's great to hire more people in that department, but only if that's going to speed up that process and still have all the regulations and everything that we need to have, and it's done in a safe way, but get that efficiency going, right? So those need to have like real timelines where it's like, hey, you're going to be open in 90 days, or you're going to get this within 30 days, your development permits. Like, we need to put those things on that economic development plan to do it. But yeah, I mean, in terms of how much land there is, there's still some, and there's still some great
Yeah.
spots to do. And even in industrial part, there's even, there's some zoning issues too, where we've zoned a lot of this in heavy industrial. And we did that to try to make sure we still keep that industrial base, but if we can change some of that zoning to allow for more commercial, there's even some opportunities. There's some market opportunities I've been talking to businesses about that want to get into that, and they're just having a bit of a zoning issue that happened when we did the whole zoning bylaw change. It wasn't just residential; it was
Right.
also for industrial and commercial. So I think a few tweaks there, we can take some of those industrial spots that you drive by a few times. You're like, "Oh, that looks pretty old and not that desirable." Maybe that could be turned into something way better that still hits our needs and still gets some tax base for us.
Changing gears a little bit, where do you think the city is underinvesting? Even though we know the tax burden feels pretty high, but where do you think the city is underinvesting?
Yeah, when we sat through, I think it was like 12 budget reports in Q1, which were great. I still think they were at a pretty high level. Like, I asked a couple questions right away. I was like, okay, well, like, give me the real details on like the personnel and the
Mm.
external services and your rent and your operations, all that. And we're still going to get that level of detail coming up. But when I was going through the departments, it seemed really obvious to me when I looked at bylaw, that was one of the lowest funded areas, right? And from what we've kind of heard for the complaints, whether it's construction complaints, compliance, vehicles not being moved when we have the parking ban, for snow removal, like, we don't have enough resources there. And I was pretty honest and frank during that meeting and said, like, this looks like a department that we should invest more on. And I'm not saying that's more on the tax levy. Maybe that's a reallocation. I'll leave that up to Min to come up with the best recommendation. But a department that has an opportunity to actually generate revenue
Yeah.
and to enforce the bylaws and the policies that we actually make at council seems to make a lot of sense, to me, right?
Yeah.
To see that level, like, I think they were actually funded less than animal control, and we need the money for animal control, and there's legislation all about that. I get that, but it kind of just put it in perspective for me. I'm like, well, we really don't have enough people out there, or we need technology more. Automated enforcement, whatever we're allowed to do from the province side, but that's a big opportunity, and I think most Edmontonians would understand that. And they said, "Well, hey, Reed, if you're going to get more money, if you're going to get more money to bylaw, that makes sense that they're actually enforcing the rules."
Yeah. I think That is such an interesting answer because it touches on so many different kind of facets. I was just talking to someone the other day that was trying to report something to 311, and she's like, "It just doesn't go through because it just doesn't seem like 311 is a thing anymore." And I think that, increasing bylaw, not only would it potentially increase revenue, but also the reputation of the city as something that,
Yeah.
as like a corporation that cares about its bylaws that it passes. Like, what's the point of having a parking ban if only what 10% of the cars get towed anyways, and then the street doesn't get cleared because the snow plows can't go down.
Well, it's just supposed to work like, I tell people, like, if you're walking around your neighborhood and you see some construction that, like, doesn't really make sense, you think, "Hey, that looks a bit off. Like, why is the tree not protected? Why is, like, the fence down?" Whatever. Like, the whole process is that should go to 311, and that should go to bylaw, and whether that's a warning or that's a ticket, whatever. But if those things all happen and someone's like, "Hey, I just went on my phone, I went on the app, I put it in," and within a couple days, we had some action taken on that, like, the level of trust between the
Yeah.
citizens and government and that everyone's doing their job and the action taken, like, I wanna get that feedback, be like, "Hey, Reed, I did this, and, like, by Friday, it was done." Like, that's pretty cool, and, I think it's fair for residents to want that and kind of expect that from us, right?
On the other side, where do you think the city is spending money that maybe it shouldn't be spending? So maybe they're overinvesting.
Yeah, on that one, and it kinda goes back into some policy things, so you know, we've got to look at there's some pretty tough decisions that we've got to make, and maybe there is some things that need to be deferred. I talked about having the infrastructure renewal and having neighborhood renewal, and those are two great things. I think now when I look at it and specifically on like neighborhood renewal, like we need to do it. Like some streets are crumbling and sidewalks and alleys, and I totally get that. When I see the list of some communities that are coming up specifically in my ward, and there's a couple in Lewis Estates, I look at that and say, does that need to be done in this budget? Can that be done in the next budget? These are still pretty new communities, in my opinion, that are, I don't know when the last house went up, but it wasn't that long ago, right?
Mhm.
So I get that it might fit in that, well, hey, it's 20 years now. This is the time we need to look at it. But maybe that needs to be pushed down and that will save some of the capital dollars that we need to put in this one. So that's kind of one example, I was looking at. And, at even infrastructure committee, we had a conversation about alleys and alleys are important to do, but should we be doing the alleys when we have arterial roads that transit uses, that people use for cars, for active transportation? Like should that be more of a priority, or should those funds be shifted over there? Right. So I think there's a few things there that I'm interested to kind of get more details and reports on to look at, because those might be some ways where we're not really affecting services levels and we're not really affecting personnel that much, but maybe it can be looked at and changed in terms of a policy perspective.
Shifting gears a little bit again,
Mhm.
when you brought up Lewis Farms and Lewis Estates, it made me think of this because you have an interesting ward where you have like the
Yeah,
very far out suburbs. My mom used to live in Lewis Estates, so I know the
yeah,
area. But
yeah.
you also have like pretty because the West Valley Line West goes most like all the way through your ward, correct? Or like
Yeah,
a
we
lot of it,
we go right from Grote Road essentially
right?
to 231st Street,
Right.
White Mud, and then Big Lakes area to St. Albert.
So where I'm going with this is that that's a lot of infill opportunities along the valley line.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have the suburban and you have these mature neighborhoods that are experiencing a lot of infill. Have you been, a big argument for infill among many other things is that it can be really helpful for the tax base because you have the denser
Yeah.
housing and then you could take more taxes from that. Has that conversation come up in your discussions with constituents at all?
Yeah, I mean, every day if I don't get an email, phone call, or somebody wants to talk about infill, it's not a regular day for me, Stephanie. And that's the reality of my ward. A lot of development is
Hmm.
happening, and it's happened pretty quick here, right? But a lot of people that, yeah, I mean, it did help the residential tax base. We did see a big lift last year on that, and we'll probably see a big lift this year on that. And I think, as I look out my window in my office here on Stony Plain Road at 150th Street, we've got a great opportunity where the LRT is going right through an area, right? an area that's been really hit hard by construction and a whole bunch of other factors over the last decade. But what a great opportunity of a place to develop where, I think with transit Edmontonians is like if you've got to walk 20 minutes to take a bus or to take the LRT and maybe you got to wait, you don't know, it becomes a harder thing to do. And it's like, "Oh, I'll just jump in my car. It's just more
Yeah.
convenient, right?" But if you're living like kind of right off a line in an area that's close to some great neighborhoods, close to River Valley, hopefully some good commercial around there. And you can just know like, oh, I can hop out anytime. And I know that train's going to be there within 5 minutes. Now we got something, right? Now we're cooking with something. And that's really how we get people to start taking different modes of transportation. So one of my big focuses is like rally for the road and really
Mhm.
developing Sterling Plain Road from 142nd to 156. And we got a few buildings knocked down already, which is great to see because that will lead to development. And I'm kind of working one by one with lots and developers to try to see what they need to really get that residential done, whether it's kind of multifamily towers, commercial mixed in. But we've got a bit of a blank slate here that we can work with. And I think that's a really cool opportunity. And I'm pushing hard to kind of get that vibrancy back, even better than I think what it was on something like Sterling Plain Road. But it kind of goes to, some of our conversations with, getting the RSM zoning and pushing that on nodes and corridors. And maybe that hasn't been as large of a focus or priority for us in the past. And I think there's a big opportunity to do that right. And you're still in these neighborhoods, you're still developing to the tax base. But if it makes you a bit closer to, a frequent transit route, I think that's a good thing. And I think a lot of people would welcome that.
What does success look like for this budget? You know, where would we be in 4 years if you got, like, everything you wished for in the budget?
Yeah, I mean, I think success really looks like one, we've got to signal to Edmontonians that tax rates are going down, right? I think we kind of have to do that to show that we understand, all the pressures that get put on from property taxes, from rent, and everything. So I think we have to show that we're doing that, and we're really kind of taking steps to make sure efficiency is done at the best way we can, which is not an easy job in the city at all. So I think you have to do that, and I think you have to really identify the priorities and the services that most Edmontonians want, right? And that we're doing those and we're doing those well, right? So those are two hard things to do. Like you're going to bring taxes down, Reed, but you want to make sure the services that are most important that we hear from the engagement surveys and we hear from our constituents are still done to a level that's kind of satisfaction and people are really acceptable with, right? So that's to me kind of what success looks like. But I think in the bigger picture, and I've always said, because even the mayor asked me that kind of when I first started, like, what does success look like in your 4-year term? And I think it's really kind of building that trust between Edmontonians and City Hall and their councillors that, like, hey, these are the things that are important to me, and here are the actions you're taking, and here's the dollars you're putting behind these things, right? So I really want to get to that level where it's like, hey, the city's like, things going great. Like we're spending money on the things that are important. The vibes are high. There's a lot of momentum. And once that kind of momentum starts, it's really hard to kind of slow it down and stop it. But we need to get those signals out to the public that we're listening, we're taking actions, we heard you, and we're investing in the things that you think are important, right? So that's the end of the day I want people to feel great about the city, should be proud of it. It's an amazing place. There's so much opportunity. There's so many good things here. And I want them to have trust in us and trust in me that we're making the best decisions for them. And, when they're traveling, they're talking up Edmonton and they're proud to do it. We're pretty humble on that, but we got to brag more. And when people come here, they want to show it off, right? That's kind of the end of day success. There's a whole bunch of layers how we get there and how we do it, but if we could do that, I would think I would be pretty happy.
Awesome. All right. Well, before I let you go, is there anything else that you wanted to say in the last couple minutes we have here?
No, I mean, hey, I'm a big fan of the show. I love what you guys are doing. We need more people talking about municipal government affects everybody's
Hmm.
daily life in so many ways. So, and it's hard to follow and to understand unless you're kind of in the chair or in your chair following along every day. So keep doing the great work. I'm happy to come on anytime. Really appreciate all the work you do.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for coming on and sharing really interesting insights. Like, I love getting to know a little bit more about how these decisions are made. So, this was very interesting for me.
Appreciate it.
All right, that was fascinating, Stephanie. How are you feeling about that conversation now? What did you take away?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised about how much we focused on like industrial and business and kind of the the balance you have to have there of keeping businesses here. And one way to do that potentially is by lowering their taxes or keeping taxes low. But at the same time, businesses and industrial are a huge source of revenue.
Hmm.
So you can't lower them too much, or else what's the point of even having them? But we talked a lot about businesses. I really also loved hearing what he had to say about vibrancy and kind of like the pride in Edmonton that he wants people to have. At the end of the day, that's the feelings of a city are really important, and even if things are like if every road was perfectly paved and every train and bus was there perfectly on time and the garbage was always taken away perfectly, but there was no life or vibrancy in the city, I don't know if people would still love living here. And I'm interested to see what happens with the Stony Plain Road area, like the Rally for the Road stuff that he's talking about. But yeah, it should all be very interesting, and I'm excited to see what comes out of this budget.
That idea that we need to think more broadly about what makes our city great came through in the interview last week with Councillor Paquette too. So really interesting to hear both a experienced councillor and relatively new
Mhm.
one sort of aligned on some of those things.
Yeah.
Going to be a very interesting budget time in the fall, Stephanie. We've got more budget coverage coming up over the weeks and months ahead. But this concludes our two-part series with a couple of counselors as we head into their summer break. They're on summer break now as you're listening to this. They're back in early August. Speaking Municipally will continue with new episodes right here every week. Until then, I'm Mac.
I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Clarke.
And we're Speaking
Speaking
Municipally.
Municipally.